On today's episode, we step back in time to 1863 to the bloodiest three-day battle during the American Civil War. That's right, we're firing rifles in the worst single battle for immediate fatalities in American history in the Battle of Gettysburg. Which Americans were fighting which Americans, and why? Put simply, the president at that time, Abraham Lincoln, among other issues, wanted to abolish slavery, as did many northern states. However, southern states relied on black slaves to harvest their crops and did not want to abolish slavery. Civil War broke out in 1861 with the United States of America, also known as the Union Army, against 11 states from the South, naming themselves the Confederate States of America. The Battle of Gettysburg was from the 1st of July 1863 to the 3rd of July 1863, with over 7,000 fatalities. That's a deadly 72 hours for America at this time, with both sides of the battle being American. The battle was the most northerly major battle fought in the Civil War, and by this point, 2 years in, each side had operational objectives. General Robert E. Lee was commanding the Confederate States Army, the rebel army as it were, and was heading north with the purpose of reclothing and shoeing his army, including horses and for any other plunder he could find. Most importantly, food. By this point, General Lee and his army were feeling positive and were looking for battle north in the hope of convincing states in the north to withdraw. But the United States Army, the Union Army, was large, well equipped and certainly well fed by this point, and were working on an overall strategy to not win the next battle, but to win the war. Nicknamed the Anaconda Strategy, devised by then Senior General Winfield Scott in 1861, was a plan to blockade Confederate ports, split the Confederacy Army in two, seizing control of the Mississippi and squeezing the circle created, which would contain most of the Confederacy. Just like a snake, the squeeze would inevitably constrict those inside the coil, squeezing until economic and military collapse of the rebels. So what had stopped this Anaconda strategy from working the last 2 years? Put simply, Lincoln lacked a general who understood how to implement the strategy that was based in the East, who could command the main Union Army, the Army of the Potomac, and an overall command of all Union forces via the telegraph system based in Washington. Phew, that's quite the general he's looking for. Lincoln had such a general, but the general perfect for the job was already fighting on the other side of the country. General Ulysses S. Grant was busy in the West, finishing off the quest of the Mississippi at the siege of Vicksburg. With this in mind, by the time of the eve of the Battle of Gettysburg, Phase 1 of the Anaconda strategy had not been achieved. All plan and no action makes Lincoln a sad president. So what does this mean for the Civil War? To put it simply, Lincoln's selection of generals in the East lacked the imagination to turn the Anaconda strategy into effective operations, and so they were constantly losing the initiative to General Lee, who was running the rebel army. General Lee is one of the best generals America has ever produced, and he was leading the opposition. In fact, one of General Lee's advantages up his sleeve was a not-so-secret fact. He had taught many of the leading United States Union Army generals during his period as superintendent of the U.S. Military Academy between 1852 and 1855. So with the Civil War, the majority of the generals were students of his. As a symptom of the problem of finding the right general to command his forces, it meant that Lincoln had been unable to appoint a general to command the Army of the Potomac within good time. So much so, General George Meade was appointed by Lincoln a mere 3 days before the Battle of Gettysburg. What's worse, General Meade did not arrive at the battlefield until the evening of the 1st of July, missing the first day of the battle. Despite General Lee training the country's generals, he did not train General Meade, as they were of the same generation. So with General Lee at the helm of the Confederacy Army, looking to replenish resources, he was also looking at Gettysburg with serious thought. Gettysburg is of strategic importance to both sides of the Civil War because it was a major road junction with roads leading south to Washington, east to Philadelphia, and ultimately Pittsburgh. But General Lee made an operational mistake permitting his cavalry under General Stuart to go off on a long-range raid. This resulted in his infantry blundering into General Buford, who was leading a Union cavalry division. This is what soldiers call a meeting engagement. Neither side is sure of what is going on and how to proceed. So the opening action of the battle was a holding action by General Buford, who got to Gettysburg just in time to deploy his troops to hold the high ground and actual town itself. General Stuart, leading the Confederacy rebels, hadn't realised how weak General Buford's forces were and acted with a degree of caution, enabling sufficient Union infantry to arrive to hold General Lee at bay. Despite the messy meeting engagement, the Confederates put in a sufficient force to take the actual town of Gettysburg and forced the Union army to fall back onto the high ground south of the town. By the morning of the 2nd July, with General Meade now commanding the Union army, both sides' main forces were on site and a really major engagement could take place, which it did. With the Union army holding the high ground in mainly wooded hills, the Confederate army was forced to attack uphill in an uncoordinated fashion. The key fight of this second day took place at the extreme left flank, a hill called Little Round Top, defended by a single regiment, the 22nd Maine, who relentlessly held a position, making a downhill bayonet charge when they ran out of ammunition. The third day of battle was mainly fought in the centre of the battle lines and involved the largest and longest artillery barrage in the entire Civil War. This was followed by a charge by a division of Virginia infantry under the command of General Pickett for the Confederacy Army. 500 troops charged across 3/4 of a mile of open ground, but with technology intervening on both sides, it allowed infantry armed with breech-loading rifles firing 3 to 5 rounds per minute. So the Confederate infantry, running for around 7 minutes across the ground to the Union army, would have had around 250,000 bullets flying in their direction. And let's not forget canister shots, something General Meade had saved during the previous artillery drill for this type of tactic of oncoming rebels. The result? Pickett's division lost about 2/3 of its men, and all 3 brigadiers were killed or wounded. Casualties on both sides were around 20,000 for the Union army and perhaps around 28,000 for the Confederate army, as they did most of the attacking. The Union army could withstand this level of damage, however, the Confederate army could not. General Lee withdrew back south of the Potomac River in good order. The Battle of Gettysburg lost and was closely pursued by the Union forces. The Union had won the Battle of Gettysburg, which undoubtedly gave them the advantage for the rest of the Civil War. When Lincoln dedicated the war cemetery at Gettysburg, filled with the dead of both sides, he gave a speech which ended with the following phrase: "That these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth." And finally, approximately 180,000 men took part in the Battle of Gettysburg. Yet after the battle, the US Army picked up approximately 20,000 rifles that had been loaded more than once but were not fired. So 11% of those men on the battlefield elected not to take part but only risk death. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and watch our next episode.